So we are live. Kirsten at 9 o'clock will start letting open up the participant group. Oh, actually, it's
Looks
open,
like
so-
they're filtering in now.
Yeah. All right, everybody is. We'll wait as folks join, and then we'll get started at 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock sharp. And then, so anyway, so back to the Q&A. So it'll be there's a button down there, and you'll see, if you see things pop up, don't worry about it. I'll take the questions and weed them in to our conversation.
Perfect.
And then we'll kind of, Terry Lee, kind of bounce back and forth on questions.
Okay.
And then we
works.
should be good. And I don't know if you have any kind of special recipe that you want to share with type of coffee that you drink or anything like that. We've had a former barista on the show.
Oh, I'm not that good, I tell you.
Yeah, that was.
We thought we weren't going to ask this question.
Well, I'm a big Nespresso fan. So
Yeah, we got one of those. Yeah, we got one of those deposit.
You know?
Great, good flavor.
I know the thing is, though, they all taste the same to me. They're good, but I can't tell the nuance usually.
Right.
Yeah, it's like it tastes almost the same but different.
Right, do start to weed in exactly.
Yeah.
All right. All right, folks, 1 minute, 1 minute left here, and then we will get started. So, all right, little intro up. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to HR Cloud and Coffee, the place for discussions on all things modernization and transformation. My name is Chris Oglesby with MorphWorks, and my co-host.
Hey, this is Terry Lee Howland. I'm with Nywick Plant. Good morning.
Morning, Terry Lee. Before the introductions, this platform is hosted under the HR Cloud and Infrastructure pillar with a goal of bringing lessons learned and ideas to the HR community. Our focus will be a conversation about our guests' experiences, past and present, executing modernization and transformation efforts. There is a Q&A button at the bottom, so feel free to enter those questions and we'll work those into the chat. Now let's move into introductions. Today our guest is Brian Merrick, the Director of Cloud Programs at the Department of State. Brian, would you mind sharing a little with the audience about your background?
Sure. Good morning, and thanks for having me on, and really looking forward to this conversation. So yeah, I mean, I started my career as an Army officer and did that for a few years in multiple locations and high adventure. Then moved on to management consulting and did a whole bunch of IT auditing and also system integration work for major Fortune 500 companies and government. And then moved into state, really actually starting off in financial management, series of management jobs. And then really moved into the digital arena, moved into supporting cloud programs from the program end, and then over time worked my way back into the central IT group, and really started pushing modernization and change management at the enterprise level. And so now I'm, as you said, the director of cloud programs, and really what we're focused on is trying to provide those shared cloud platform capabilities for our customers at state to take advantage of, and also doing enterprise applications in the cloud to support decision support and major strategic requirements across the department.
Excellent, excellent. So we had a chance to chat before, and you guys are working on some very interesting projects. The past year really has had some interesting new mandates and executive orders that are coming out. And one of the things that you talked about is the use of data. So how are you leveraging data to support all of these new policies and policy changes that are going on?
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, just the complexity of the geographic dispersion in our organization, and trying to really get a clear sight picture on what's happening at the senior management level. And just put it in perspective for folks real quick, we have about 110,000 users, 275 overseas locations, 50 US locations. And we also deal with non-government organizations, other governments, of course, other government agencies, and a whole host of partners throughout the globe. So when we have to work through some of these issues, it can truly become quite complex. And so what we've really done is, as we've risen to the occasion to meet a lot of these challenges, like say COVID tracking and whatnot, we've leveraged cloud platforms. We also have a really close relationship with we call it the Center for Analytics at the department layer, that really provides that holistic data analytics capability and decision support tools for senior management, and obviously to support any major initiatives that are happening. So basically, in our side, we provide the capabilities that capture the data, the tools, the applications, and then we basically move that data through APIs into the data lake for the department, and that fuels the analytics. So that way decision makers can really have a clear picture. For the first time, we can gather large amounts of very clean data by connecting to our master reference data tables, and by making sure that we've got a very solid approach in terms of understanding the assumptions of what data elements we're asking for, and teeing that up also with really good usability, and focusing a lot of time and energy on the design of it, so we actually get the right information. Um, and that's been instrumental in several major things, especially, all you can imagine, everyone's going through the COVID tracking, vaccination tracking. On top of that, we also have, medical folks in the field, so actually tracking their status and capability, and what our medical posture is for support. So there's also an operational dynamic that comes into it, and there are a whole host of other major initiatives, especially around crisis management, that we've been doing lately, that um, have been huge. We've been able to turn around information in hours, which would have taken weeks before.
So with the executive orders, obviously zero trust and
Mhm.
the cloud and the world that you live in, even more so. How is that something that you guys were early adopters? Were you moving forward with something like that beforehand? Can you step into a little bit of zero
Mhm.
trust and kind of the cyber world?
Yeah, certainly. So, so there were two components to that EO. So obviously there was a zero trust component, and then also the need to update the cloud strategy. So we updated both of those strategies sort of hand in hand, really focusing on some main precepts for the cloud piece first, which was looking at throwing the marker down for our future state in terms of reaching cloud parity. So what we're trying to do is get to the point where all of the key enablement pieces, like the way we manage DNS, single identities, the whole host of things that also go hand in hand with zero trust, that would reach the parity of what we have in terms of support for on-prem environments. And obviously that's a journey, and so we started down that road. We have quite a ways to go, but I think it was important that for the first time we really laid that out and what the approach was going to be. On the zero trust piece, what I like about that is it's really an acknowledgement that we need to think about security more three-dimensionally, and that as we approach, the use of the cloud even more, how do we really get to the point where we're securing our data, not worry so much about the network or the perimeter, worry about the data pool and where that's sitting. And so, in that strategy, really, we look at identity as sort of the new perimeter, if you will. So having that single identity allows us to know who's resolving to what DNS, what access they have to what data elements, and therefore what we need to protect and mitigate against threats. So that's a key cornerstone. And there are other components of it too, like cloud security posture management, where we have started down that road. It's a long road. There's a lot we have to do to get there. In addition, every day tools to support that are maturing, and getting better and better and better. So we're constantly reevaluating and thinking through how do we bring different components together to provide enhanced security. And I think that'll be a constant endeavor to improve and stay ahead of our adversaries.
Yeah, on those same lines, Brian, I know when we talked before, I'm going to try to get this right. I think I was supposed to say drink your own bourbon, right? Instead of eat your own dog food.
Yes, yes.
Um, that's what I'd like to dive in there,
Hmm.
because I think you just started to touch on like the tech refresh and the pace that we
Hmm.
have to change, and you've hit on the COVID tracking and the
Hmm.
vaccination tracking, and those are areas that we need to turn around data in a very quick period of time we're not used to that pace, right?
Right.
So if you could speak a little bit about like your experiences that you've seen in-house and how you're using that to, better what you're providing to your customers.
Yeah, really. I mean, it all comes down to people and process, really. The tech becomes ancillary, quite frankly. I know a lot of people like to talk about tools and whatnot, and certainly you have to have those tools. But for us, we had already laid the foundation in our organization internally. So we basically moved to a flat organizational structure, and we followed agile principles in designing that. So we had platform teams, and then we also had enablement teams and product teams. So by looking at it that way, we were able, and we had matrix folks in between, but we really leveraged that two pizza team concept, so that ensured personal accountability for everyone on those teams. And we used varying different types of agile depending on what it is we were doing. So for instance, our cloud infrastructure platform teams use more Kanban or Scrum of Scrums if you're doing something large. Our dev teams are using more lean, right, because it just makes sense. And so as we build out that capability over time and those relationships and the talent that we brought, we were also able to get a large amount of commercial grade talent on the contract side. And um, as we kind of took advantage of the crisis of COVID, there was less commercial advisory work, and so we were able to get some of that commercial talent in, and that really helped us speed up our development efforts. And so, for instance, one of the crisis applications we did for a major evacuation, um, we did that application in 9 days from request, so that's pretty fast. But we had
Mhm.
all of the key components in place first, the relationships and the processes to do that. So, you can't just go from 0 to 100 that way, but you've got to have those underlying pieces that are in place. And so basically the things we espouse to other people that, you need to leverage enterprise platforms, you need to use agile, you need to understand your business customer. We do all that. And that's how we're able to provide these type of capabilities, at speed, at scale. And we're really doing it in line with the speed of business and mission. So we're getting inside the decision cycle of the decision makers, and we're able to react and provide them feedback through an agile process just as fast as their policy and process changes are emerging. And so creating that synergy with the mission is the secret sauce. That's what's different. And that's what most IT organizations lack, because they try to kind of distance themselves from that because it's hard and it's scary and it's a lot of personal risk to do that. But when you do, that's how you get that kind of awesome, fast, effective delivery. And it's just so critical. So yeah, you got to eat your own dog food on that one, or it just doesn't work. Or drink your own bourbon.
All right, drink your own bourbon. And we're going to move this to a cloud and cocktail session.
Yes, yes.
We need to continue that. So
We do.
I want to take that aspect, because we've talked about customer experience on here a lot,
Mhm.
and the importance that the technology, and in our company we talk about the emotional side of change, right?
Yeah.
That we're used to what we're used to, right? If you're a certain phone user, right? You use an iPhone and somebody hands you an Android, there's that pucker factor.
Mhm.
And it is getting to that understanding of what is it that you're trying to do. So in this world, and I love what you were talking about around the security side, because there has been over the years a large propensity to protect the wall, right? I want to
Mhm.
protect the perimeter.
Right.
We need to do that, but it really is, in our new worlds, which was fine when everything was sitting behind the perimeter wall, right? But
Mhm.
now the perimeter walls are everywhere.
Mhm.
And so how in that speed of the multi kind of frameworks that you have, do you build the security into those aspects, right? To not disrupt, right? Because
Right.
there is always that that risk management pendulum that everybody thinks through,
Mhm.
which is, oh well, we can't do that because we need to do we need to block this door. But
Mhm.
how do you guys tie that into the framework?
So there's obviously a few components to that. I mean, one of the nice things on the technical side is that cloud is just mechanically segmented. It just is.
Right.
So unlike a physical network where generally, I mean, we all strive for network segmentation, but in reality, that's really hard to achieve, just based on the way technology was 20 years ago. Now where we are, we're able to basically manage that through role-based access for users. And so that identity layer is really providing the first line of defense in terms of who should be able to access that data. Within that, we also manage carefully the roles of who has access to what. Um, and that segmentation does defer some of the risk in terms of if somebody does get into that data set, they can't necessarily go anywhere else with it. And so obviously, as we move up in maturation and do more cloud security posture management, get more cloud access security broker capabilities and to augment that, that gives us additional capabilities as well. But from the risk standpoint, because we're living this now and we don't have all of that in place yet. We have some, a little bit, we got a ways to go. But from a risk standpoint, the way we've been able to work this out is that we basically make sure we have unity command in terms of decision making. So when we have one of these cross-cutting projects, I'm the system owner. I find a data owner who can speak to who should have access and who shouldn't to this. And oftentimes, with what we're engaged in, there are a lot of legalities around who can access what type of data. It's not just a security piece. So it gets a little more layered and complex. And then we make sure we have a product owner, if you will, for the effort that's in the business that can speak to the process and the policy objectives and the program. And we bring all that together with our team that works through it so that as we're making those risk decisions, I understand what that means to the actual person on the ground because we have to balance that out. And then if it comes to the point where the risk gets kind of terrifying, then I'll go back to the right powers that be and we'll try to figure out more mitigations. We also have close relationships with our security folks that do a lot of the external monitoring. So we'll ramp up monitoring activities on specific platforms, and they also provide us a little more specific threat intel based on, because we kind of know who's looking for what in
Right.
general. So we can get some good TTPs from them on things we need to do to mitigate specific platforms and engagements. But obviously that's not everything. That's when we're doing specific high priority things. So we do have a baseline of security for everything, of course, and we leverage FedRAMP heavily from a compliance standpoint. We only support FedRAMP compliant platforms, and by doing that and bringing all that together, it helps us sort of mitigate a lot of that risk activity. But it is an ongoing challenge, of course.
Yeah, no, I can imagine.
Yeah, and Brian, a couple of things that you've hit on. Really, I like the way that you're painting the picture of complexity. And we've talked about the technology side of it
Mhm.
and the business process of it. I think when I was actually a guest, my biggest thing was like, we can do the technology side all day long, but it's the business processes and the people working together that let's admit it, that's where the struggle is. So when you started
Yes.
to paint the picture of how you guys built that foundation, how did you organically grow that within the organization? What did that look like? Because and I think this is a question I ask a lot of people that we bring on here because I think it's an area that we're all still struggling a little bit in, and it needs to grow organically. So I would just like to hear
Yep.
more on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, actually, I mean, I don't usually get asked this, but I love to talk about the people aspect of it. That's where the real strategy is. And that's where you kind of make your
Mhm.
bones and make these things happen. So, initially, I mean, I was a customer of this organization and I hired customers. And so what that did, and I created a strategy that didn't take from my customers, it helped, right? So in doing that, one, they had a friendly, familiar face to engage with that understood them and was part of them. Two, our folks know how challenging it is to navigate, the IT industrial complex, if you will, to get things done, and can help kind of navigate our customers through that. And then, one of the, third one of the major components we did with this is we created the shared responsibility model, shared service model. So by doing that, we don't take over everybody's stuff. What we do is we provide a layer of platform support on top of the cloud platform, on top of the CSP, which allows our business customers to have greatly reduced management controls and security controls they have to put in place. So, average an IaaS environment, they only have, we take care of a third of the controls. In a SaaS or an APaaS environment, sometimes we take all the controls. All
Oh,
they
wow.
own is their data. And so by doing that, they can actually move right into production in a 2-week sprint without an ATO because they're under ours, because we control all the levers outside of that and the promotion of the code to production, but they own the development and they own the data. and they own the relationship with their business customers. So by doing that, we've abstracted away a lot of the back end work, and the competition for talent is fierce. So instead of all 34 bureaus having to build their own AWS or Azure team or ServiceNow team or Salesforce team or whatever, we're able to create that at the platform layer, and then they only need the application of the workload layer. That takes a lot of work off it, and we're funded for that. And since we use a lot of automation, we don't need people to scale, so I don't have to charge them for that. So they get that free from us, 'cause that's what we do. And so when they have a problem, we can help them navigate through it, but it's still theirs. They still own it. And so by doing that, we're not competing. We're not taking away from them. We're helping them in an area they need help. Because frankly, I mean, even though yes, we do have a very robust development capability, we can't talk to 275 posts. It's too big, right? We can't do every application out there. I mean, we have 47 different reporting organizations beyond just the posts at sort of the bureau level, if you will, special envoys, whatnot. Um, that's way too much, and all but 6 of them do completely different things. So the level of complexity is pretty large. So by building those relationships and that trust over time, and by helping them help themselves, then that opens the door to the relationship when it gets to the cross-cutting point. And so where a lot of these things really tipped for us was that everyone builds, Conway's law, right? Everyone builds IT to the limit of their organizational boundary, basically. Right. So now we're in a situation where the speed of mission is so fast and so rapid, and the expectations are so high that when things go cross-cutting beyond one bureau, if you will, one business unit's purview, there's nothing there to knit it all together. And so we come in and do that, and we leverage the senior management assistants at the undersecretary level and the deputy secretary level to kind of open the doors for us and say, hey, work with these guys, are going to do X. And then we come in and do our thing. And so by building that trust and credibility across the board, we get help because we're not taking away from somebody's mission. We're filling a gap where, there isn't sort of an owner, if you will, a clear owner from an organizational construct. And that's sort of how we did all this. And we've got 100 apps in the cloud. We support almost every bureau now in some degree, in different states of maturation. There's a lot of work we still have to do in the field. Obviously, that's a lot harder. That's a whole other dynamic, but we are going to tackle that too. So it's just it's a evolution. It's a different way of doing IT. It's really getting to the point where we're moving out of the service model and into that sort of anticipatory business alignment model, and that's hard. And nobody's really everyone talks about it, but it's really hard to do, and that's how we're taking a stab at it. And like I say, I think we've had some great initial success, but it's just a really tough thing that takes constant care and feeding and a lot of growth space for us to do.
So to dive in a little bit, there was a question on the shared services and which bureaus are buying and platforms, and I think you've addressed some of those questions. But I am curious, right? Because shared services has been, I mean, Terry Lee, I think ultimately your shared services environment, right? I mean, shared services has been, been a topic of discussion, probably back to to your Army days and before, right? Oh yeah, we're going to do it for you. How, one interesting thing though that you talked about though was the ability to create that, almost that, hey, here's your starter kit at no cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
But how did you get, from a lessons learned? Because I think that's really important for the audience. How did you start that? Because that's not something that you want to take over
Right.
the enterprise and do, right? I mean, so how did you guys get started in that?
So years ago, we started incubating the whole cloud platform concept, and then as soon as we were able to demonstrate people that, hey, it takes you 6 weeks to buy and put a physical server in place, and we can spin up a managed configured environment in AWS in 2 minutes by pushing this button, that kind of changed the discussion. It kind of lit these light bulbs off of, wow, we can do what? And then as we kind of progressed in this and we got into different platforms, and obviously the multi-platform was the way to go because just our disparate missions, and it's not just the missions, it's also different bureaus have different teams with different skill sets, and trying to totally flip somebody from one code base or one platform to another, I mean, you got to change oil on your whole team. and no one's going to do that. It's too expensive, too time consuming, whatnot. And so what we did is we kind of started growing the business of it. Was, I hear this all the time. It's like, well, we want to pick off the low hanging fruit and, take an easy path and just try something out. And I was like, no, 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 no. It takes the same amount of technical effort to do something easy that nobody cares about as to do something that is really important. And even if you don't get it all, if you even make a dent in it, you're going to get attention. So I went asymmetric in that thinking. So we partnered with an organization that had a really compelling mission that crossed a lot of boundaries overseas and domestically in some pretty exciting areas. And this was really around refugee work. Very complicated from a business, programmatic, legal, and platform standpoint, just physicality. I mean, they're working with folks that don't have access to the internet, and then they have to manipulate data and move it and do a lot of things with it. And so, a lot of folks said, well, why would you start with that? And I said, because if we can fix that problem, there's not a single problem here we can't fix. And so by doing that, and we did, it took a lot of time and effort. We invested about a year, year and a half of just really hard work on both teams, making this come together and work. We had to build the trust, had to get the teams working together and understand that, yes, when you say this, we understand this means that. We had written agreements that and we got all that going, and we basically created sort of the shared rules of the road for what made sense of what you do, what we do, and how we manage the difference in between, how we govern the decisions and the activity. And then now here we are, fast forward, they've completely deployed this all overseas to all their environments. They're super happy and successful and just in time to react to a lot of these major war crises. And then that relationship, tackling that hard problem, now when people say, well, gee, I mean, how do you justify your budget? And I just say, well, I don't have to, because my customers fight for my money to keep them going. And that's huge. And not my technical customers, my business customers. So by latching on to something so incredibly important that also was representative of all the capabilities we would need to roll out later, it changed the whole dynamic. And we went from being some wonky science project idea to being like a force multiplier for the department to achieve core missions. Um, that changed everything. And so now I got more business than I can deal with. Actually, um, we have more demand than we can
That's a good
satisfy.
problem to have, though, right?
Kind of, because we're still limited by the range of humans having decisions and interacting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's kind of how we approached it, and it's working.
Yeah, this conversation reminds me of one that we had. So shout out to a previous guest, Charlotte Lee, who talked a lot about user and customer experience. And you talk about like the quick wins versus, or the low hanging fruit versus like diving in on some real problems. And one of the areas that she pushed was don't go after the MVP that somebody can't utilize or actually show like success with, but go after the MMP, the minimal marketable product. And that's what you're talking about, is like having that business case to market. And like that, that struck me then, it strikes me now. And, we're just hitting on a lot of those same key areas. And so it's nice to hear the same messaging across the different areas. So I think that's all like really good stuff. And I'm still at awe with the complexity that you guys are dealing with and where you are in your journey. Because, just from what we do, I know that takes a lot. So it sounds like you guys are doing amazing and bringing stuff forward that probably before COVID and everything we didn't think was possible. So kudos to you guys for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'd say the whole COVID experience just changed everyone's expectation of, how to work, and it really gave us an opportunity to sort of speed up. I mean, I think we skipped a couple evolutions just by everyone having to use the cloud to do just everything. It really was a game changer. So we just took advantage of the crisis.
So how, and I think you've touched on it, but and it is one thing that we've kind of touched on in different levels. The kind of the multi-cloud environment, right? Because obviously we talked, in our host last year, we talked a lot. Our co-host last year talked a lot about the cloud first to cloud smart, and I think that's that understanding is key, right? So definition of cloud, because it can be defined differently for different people, right? If you're
Mhm.
if you're a developer,
Sure.
cloud is you're not thinking infrastructure necessarily, thinking how quick can I develop an app,
Right.
and so, but multi-cloud gets to even another level of, well, wait a second, what does that mean, and what does it mean to an organization? I think you covered a little bit
Mhm.
in each one, but can you kind of dive into it from just that topic perspective?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I get the cloud first thing. I mean, I was around when that was a thing, and actually, at the time, the group I was in, we were like 95% cloud because we were doing public outreach, so you just kind of had to, right? Um, and I saw the power of that and what we could do and how fast we could do it, and it was just amazing compared to all the prior capabilities. And even now, it's just even better. But the challenge is, I think what people ran into is that somebody's somewhere along the line told somebody in government that cloud is cheaper. It's not. It's just not. Okay. I'm sorry, but it's
Thank
not.
you.
It's not cheaper. And I'm going to let everyone know another little secret. The government pays more for cloud licensing than the commercial sector because we will, and we don't leverage our buying power as really we're the equivalent of a Fortune 1 company when you put the whole government spend together. And we haven't quite figured out how to do that yet. There's a lot of efforts going on. I know GSA is making great inroads in doing this, and I think we will get there. Um, but the other thing to it too is that IT's become so ubiquitous now that, I mean, yeah, you can't look at it like a symmetric one for one, right? So hey, I have this old system on this antiquated platform that's falling apart, it's end of life, and now I'm going to suddenly move that one thing over here the same way, and it's somehow going to be cheaper. It's like, well, that doesn't work that way because the functionality is different, the capabilities are different, the way we move data is different, and now you need more expensive, highly trained people to put all that together. And the problem you run into for the agencies, and this is where it kind of moved into cloud smart, is that those old clunky systems are usually end of life, so there's no money behind them. There's no real budget for that. They're on life support. So how do you get that corpus of funding to be able to hire these really expensive people? And how do you figure out the licensing model when the a lot of the vendors rebundle and change their licenses every 6 to 9 months? And we budget on a 3-year cycle. So a lot of complex moving parts. And so there was this big push, get out there. And then people were like, well, we're not really saving that money because it's just not cheaper and I can't afford it. And so, a lot of ideas about moving the working capital fund, and I actually set up a working capital fund cost center. So I do understand that. But there are a lot of challenges with that and nuances to it. It's not as simple as it sounds, on a briefing deck. So as you try to do that now, I think we've come to this realization that, hey, we have this large amount of investment already in on-prem. How do we leverage what we already have, because we can't afford to do it all, and how we take advantage of the cloud for the things that matter? So what we're seeing in our perspective is that, like I said, we have, I think, about 100 apps, probably more, in the cloud now in our different environments, just at the enterprise level. There's a lot more out there than just what we have, right? Dispersed environments, a franchised sort of model. And what we're seeing is that we've only done maybe one or two lift and shifts. It's not popular. It doesn't work real well. It's not optimal. And like I said, it's all different. It all works differently. So what we're seeing is that the programmatic side that has a lot of funding to do specific things like new mandates, new emerging crises, new programmatic directions, that's where the funding comes in, and all that new activity happens in the cloud. So we're actually seeing a lot more net new happening. And then over time, as groups build up that net new, they start bringing down the legacy systems they just don't need anymore because they're not doing that activity. But it's not a one for one, it's not a symmetric budget offset. And so the bean counters are really struggling with, how do we show ROI? And so what we see is the ROI is really not about some sort of cost savings exercise. It's really about achieving mission objectives more, better, faster, cheaper, and more securely. And that's what people are focusing on now. So, and in doing that, what we're actually seeing is a lot more hybrid multi-cloud implementation. So, for instance, let me give you an example. So, that one that I was just talking about, you have people that are inputting data, NGOs inputting data in an austere environment on a physical laptop that has a copy of a cloud-based app on it. They come into internet range, and they've uploaded that into a mobile server device, which I don't want to talk about specific companies. And then they transit that data into our enterprise environment for processing. And then that data moves from that one platform to another one of our platforms on the IS side to then do the actual analytics behind it. And then the result of that analytic data is shared back out to multiple agencies back to their on-prem environments. So it's like a giant circle, right? And that's a more complex example. We have more routine ones, but basically what we see a lot of is data staying on-prem, processing happening in APaaS or SaaS, analytics happening in IaaS. And that's kind of the model we're seeing more generally now for the larger organizations.
You know, I don't know if you can hear me clapping. I still be, by the way, with the comment that you made about as far as like costs. Because
Yeah.
that seems to be like a major driver. And are we saving costs? And some of the efforts that I've seen and that been a part of, like trying to get the move from on-prem to cloud. Part of that I see is like with these legacy applications that you're talking about, but also the hope is to right size those applications as well in the cloud to enable some cost savings, but also to, okay, at least get them in the cloud, these legacy systems, get them in the cloud, get them right sized if possible. And then hopefully, if they are going to stick around, start the modernization effort. So, it's really interesting to see how different areas are tackling this. And the last point that you made about the data staying on-prem and the processing happening in the cloud, we've actually heard the opposite. And not to challenge what you're saying, but it's really interesting to hear another side of it, because what we've heard is it's cheaper to store the data in the cloud. And that's where the data should live. And so, just hearing these different conversations, I'm glad we're having them, because I think it's important to look at all the options we have available. And to me, that's what cloud brings to the table, right? Is the different ways that it could be utilized.
Well, and let me clarify that point, because you are correct. Storage in the cloud is cheaper than on-prem. The challenge is you have to pay for the people that can move that data and manage it in the cloud. And those organizations aren't there yet. So it's not that, somehow cloud is not as good as on-prem. Don't misunderstand that. It's that we have to meet all these organizations where they are. And so a lot of them are just not at the point of maturation in their development of their teams and their skill sets to be able to actively manage those workloads in those environments. Because it is cheaper to have storage in the cloud, especially if it's archival and you really don't need it very often. The other thing too, though, is you also have to ask a question in terms of how they're doing cost modeling on the on-prem environment, right? So for us, the on-prem data centers are centrally funded and centrally managed. So ostensibly for the customer, it's free to them. It's not optimal, but they don't have to spend money on it. So it gets back to that kind of comment that if that funding is flat for that system and it's sitting in a place that doesn't cost that business owner any money, but he has to spend money to move it and buy better staff or more, I should say better, more, staff that's technically has the acumen in that platform. Well, then that's a huge outlay that person has to go compete for with other programmatic areas in their organization that get the limelight, whereas this may be some back office function that people don't really think about that much. So there's just a little more to the dynamic to consider, I think.
Yeah, I think,
absolutely.
Go ahead, Terry Lee.
No, in a complete agreement.
So, kind of in that aspect, in that vein, one of the big things, right? Because you touched on a number of areas, right? Kind of the meet you where you are from an organizational maturity standpoint. We talked about IT, kind of the cost differences, right? And you definitely wave that flag clearly, and we talk about that a lot, I think, and so, really, as you look at it, and we had, I think we really kind of dove into this conversation, is kind of that business value, right? That alignment of the business value to the IT, to the budget, to the acquisitions. I mean, that is really where things need to be heading, and you've kind of been touching all around it. So can we spend a little time on that aspect? And in your organization?
Yeah, certainly the budget side is just hard in government. And to be fair, I mean, especially if there are viewers that aren't actually in government, there's a reason for it. There's a reason it's this challenging. It's really to protect the power of the purse and, the separation of powers between government. So there's a reason that it's this difficult. The challenge though is as we try to keep up with the speed of mission on the IT side, very hard to budget for, especially emerging technologies. We have a lot of missions that pop up out of the blue. I mean, obviously, there are different types of agencies, right? The ones that are more compliance based versus the ones that are more service based have really different cost models and approaches to how they have to just manage their business, right? It's kind of those are the two flavors in government, really. Um, for us as more, I mean, obviously we have some more compliance pieces and fee-based pieces, but for the majority of it, it's more service-based. I mean, even diplomacy is at the core a service for the country. So as we look at that, the challenge is we're always trying to find investment strategies so that we can at least have things aligned in the right general path from a portfolio or a capability standpoint. And that way, if we need to make, a, a different turn in a fork in the road, from a specific tactical event standpoint, we've at least already accounted for the need to have a thing that does that. And so by doing that, we're able to really get ahead of some of these changes. So it's not all gloom and doom. You just have to think about it. You got to think like 3 moves out. So like I know that my customers right now need a better, um, CI/CD platform as a service for custom development. And we'd been going down the road of primarily APaaS and SaaS development as the kind of the new thing, until guess what? Those companies changed their license models, which then threatened our budget stance. Well, now we're making a move, right? So now we look at that and go, well, that's cute. Great. Awesome. You guys do that. Now we're going to find a way to make sure that we also have an alternative from a budget standpoint. So we're now starting to shift resources that way. As we have that capability build up, then as tactical changes happen, we've already got the investment lined up to do that core work, and we can make minor tweaks and changes versus having to react wholesale inside of a budget cycle. So as I said, I mean, it's a 3-year cycle, and so you're in different states of that. Part of the challenge too is that being under continuing resolution, you only get, a small part of your budget. It basically is it's an allocation that goes for a percentage of your budget between, based on what you spent last year, between that period of time. And then the department layer has to decide, how to allocate that appropriation or series of appropriations. Most agencies have multiple appropriations. And so as that happens, we have to really forward fund a lot. We have to have things that are more budgetable. And so when you look at things like, hey, yes, it looks like you can save a bunch of money doing, by the drink consumption based costing for cloud. Yes, only if you've budgeted for the ballpark, you know. And so if you haven't, you're really in trouble because you're just going to go dark out of the blue if you don't have the funding laid up for that. So trying to manage that is challenging. So that was the beauty of having sort of per seat licensing models. It was easy straight line math. You could work your way around that. Well, as those models have become more complex, it's caused us to change our approach to how we budget and also where we put our centers of gravity for the types of things we do. So I guess the more of the story is that, at least for us, technical decisions on tools is really more about how we buy it than just what it is. That's not enough anymore to have a really cool thing. If I can't afford it, or it's hard to get to, or I can't budget for it, or the licensing model makes it hard for me to provide as a service to my customers because I'm going to somehow pass that cost onto them, becomes something that then it's like, well, that's really cool, but we're not going to do that because it's not feasible. So that's just something to for everyone to think about as you go through this. You really have to sort of think through all the business angles and how that aligns, from more of a budget perspective as well.
And then do you align that to acquisition model as well? So
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
yeah,
because that's
definitely.
always a
So
challenge, right? Like
yep.
you said, you're looking out 3
Hmm.
years, you've got a project
Yep.
that's 5 to 7 to 10, right? And
Hmm.
you kind of have to balance that, that math to, okay, and you can't really forward think, the evolution of
Yeah.
technology, but
Right.
acquisition is getting harder and harder as the speed of technology is there
Right.
to
Right.
leverage. And I agree with you. I think there are opportunities to buy at a .gov level that probably haven't been capitalized on.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is a constant challenge. And some of the things we're trying to do to mitigate that is that so like, for instance, right now, the enterprise license agreements for the cloud platforms that we offer to the department, our office manages those from the COR standpoint. So we make sure that the terms match how we're going to manage it. So, for instance, in our IaaS environments, we don't put money on the contract. We set the contract up so the business customer puts their own purchase request on and puts their own funding line on and manage that themselves. So that way we're able to scale without being caught flat footed because of cash flow issues with CRs. So things like that, those tactics that we basically have to put in contractually, allow us to then adjust to the constraints in the budget and the changes that the business customers have. So that's just one small example of how we kind of lean into that a little bit. It's obviously a lot harder when you're talking about disruptive emerging technologies. I mean, if we budgeted 3 years ago and all of a sudden, I don't know, there's a hologram tool that comes up out of my desk, and I don't know that now.
Okay.
So that's where that can get pretty challenging. And then obviously we have to do budget offsets to try to start that off earlier. But for most things, you kind of know, hey, I need a footprint in this thing. And we try to get there at least initially. The other thing we do to save a lot of time is we like to use GWAX as much as we can, preferred source of supply. I mean, that's just the right thing to do. That cuts a lot of the procurement time down significantly. So things like that we focus on.
Right.
I think when you were talking about the costs, Brian, and again, in total agreement. So
Yeah.
we run cost centers, and with the CR and stuff, it has been tough because when you're providing services, platform services, you're now like a service provider. Those don't just get shut off because the money's not there, when it's supposed to be, and
hmm
having that understanding with your business base to say this is how the application is going to continue to run.
hmm
It's a different conversation to be having. But, I think the biggest point that we've been talking about throughout this is just that collaboration with the business side is so
Right.
important in everything that we're doing. Is we have to understand the requirements. They have to understand how we're operating the platforms, and
hmm
that it does become a conversation of business more than it is of the technology. And
hmm
on the licensing side, I just, it's tough. I'm happy to see what I think you're seeing too, is that moving more towards the enterprise agreements, so that we can manage a larger base of licenses that we weren't doing before. We've definitely seen some cost savings there, at least on the licensing side, but also on the management side, managing them a certain way within the different platforms, I think has paid
Yeah.
off. And the mission owners, or what we call our mission owners,
hmm
or the business side, I think there's organic growth there as well, through the collaborations and stuff. So those are some key points that have definitely helped us out, that you're hitting on. So that's good stuff. And I think there was a question, Chris. The last part of that question was like the multi-platform and like what cloud platforms that you're using and stuff. And I know you hit on this, Brian, that you are using like multi-platforms, but it also gets to like tech refresh and
hmm
how are we moving in between those different areas? I know we're coming up on the 10-minute mark, but can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean, we use most of the major cloud providers that you would think of, right? Um,
Mhm.
and we're, like I say, so we're purposely duplicative so that we can avoid vendor lock-in and we can shift between different platforms. But that has a limit, right? Based on, especially on the APaaS SaaS side, based on licensure. So that's something that we manage pretty carefully. The strategy around that is, something we really work through. And obviously, I'm not going to talk about individual vendor strategies. That would not be good for me. But but yes, we do have most of those. And like I said, what we see is that most of our business customers gravitate to one or the other based on the center of gravity of the skill sets in their teams to manage the workloads. And then a lot of times it's also, at least on the IS side, it's more a mix of the product offerings that are more aligned to the tasks they're trying to do, especially around analytics tools. That's a
Mhm.
big hot one. But it really does depend. And we don't see a whole lot of cost difference really between the IaaS platforms. And frankly, the APaaS and SaaS models are very similar. They get you in and then they radiate and then the cost goes up exponentially through rebundling. And so that's a constant challenge to kind of work through. And there's limits, like I say, on how much duplication we can put in those environments because of the cost exposure. But that's something we're always working through. What I don't see, and I hear this sometimes in industry as well, what if you need to port your apps between these different environments? That just doesn't happen. It just doesn't. People don't do that. More to the point, because of they have skill sets on their team to do X, and the cost difference is negligible in Y. So why do that? We haven't seen a lot of containerization take off. There's a couple of bureaus that will do that because it makes sense for their business, but most of these organizations have discrete business requirements they're trying to do. It's a lot of workflow data visualization. There are back office functions and things like that, but it doesn't usually require any sort of movement of applications between environments. The data moves. The data moves all over the place, and that's where I think the big kind of multi-cloud Achilles heel is that the beauty of it is that you have all these different capabilities. The challenge is securing and knitting the API relationships between all of these things, and also the access to those different data elements, because as that data element itself moves from one platform to another, and then other users have access to that, well, you change fundamentally the usage and the legal parameters around that one piece of data. And so this is a really wicked hard problem. We're working with our data folks in the Under Secretary's office to kind of start thinking through is, well, how do we manage that? Because I don't know that as a tech guy that, if this person's looking at the data, it falls under this law. If this person's looking at it, falls under that law, but it's the same data and we're moving it all over the place. So how do we attach that relationship to that single data element? Really complex. So I think that kind of thing is where we're going to get into more of the interrelationship issues at the platform layer for sure. I don't know if
So
that kind of answer.
to that, yeah, thank you, and I think, yeah, definitely gives some more definition to that question. So interesting. We talked about the cyber side. How, you guys do have unique, every organization is different, right? But you guys have your own unique challenges. How do you take those discussions, and what is your approach to kind of managing speed of technology, multi-cloud mandates? How do you manage that within your organization's risk profile? Because you guys have the uniqueness. I mean, you laid out the organizational structure, the number of countries you're in, the number of offices you have, the locations, and the various bureaus. How do you really kind of keep that all organized within kind of an overarching enterprise risk profile?
Yeah, so like I said, I mean, we have a baseline expectation of how we're securing our environments, and we have ATOs on everything, of course, and so that's sort of our baseline starting point. The thing that gets nuanced really is when we have these really unique mission outliers that cause a risk benefit trade-off decision. That's where it gets pretty interesting. And frankly, we're still working through how to formalize that at scale, because it ends up being right now managed by exception. And since I'm the system owner, I'm kind of the default like catcher of all the risk, right? Um, Even though, yeah, there may be an ATO for somebody's widget. Well, if I built the widget, it's kind of my problem too.
They're
Well,
gonna
my
Hence,
problem.
hence why we were
exploit you
talking
every
about
time.
drinking your own
Right.
bourbon, right? Drinking your own bourbon.
Yes, a lot of that.
When you're the risk owner, you need the bourbon.
Exactly. So the key to this for us really is having a clearly defined data owner, because like I said, it's all about the data and the risk to that data. So that's really where the rubber meets the road, and making sure that data owner is somebody on the program side that can actually like opine on these decisions really. Because like I said, just to give you, that general, I mean, I kind of talked through an example where you get that nuance on the data side. That's really the challenge. So now where we are is we've got to figure out next, how do we formalize that and make that a recurring process, so that, because we're going to do this more and more. It's just going to speed up. It's not going to stop. Once you've done it, you can. And if you don't, it doesn't mean you can, it means you won't. And won't's a different kind of problem. So now at this point, it's going to be partnering with our chief data officer and really building out the governance around those risk decisions, and then bringing in our security folks into those discussions. And we do now, but we don't do it formally. Well, I shouldn't say we don't do it formally. We don't have like a recurring process for that, right? So now we've got to actually formalize the whole approach of how we raise those decisions and put criteria around them.
So as we come to the end here, I'm going to hit you with probably a question that if I did, we would have taken taken up a big chunk.
Uh-oh.
So we talk a lot about change management on here, and the kind of
Yeah.
the challenge of change, right?
Mhm.
The shift from technology of the server hugger to to the
Yeah.
cloud. But really, I mean, what you addressed a lot today was kind of that the people side, the process, and kind of that workflow, understanding the customer experience, understanding the user.
Mhm.
How do
Yeah.
you and again, it allows you to not have to dive in for 30 minutes on it, but kind of in the last 5 to 8 minutes here, how are you guys managing the kind of that change management, that cultural shift that has to happen
Yeah.
within an organization with everything you guys are doing?
So I think for any organization, it's important to understand what levers of power drive decisions and drive behavior, and what's the culture behind it, because culture eats strategy all the time. So folks that come in and say, "Well, I have this really cool widget, go use it," not going to get adoption, right? So the technology and the approach to it has to jive with the culture and the people using that and supporting it, or you're just not going to get anywhere. So first off, the tone from the top. So our CIO is very into customer centricity, mission achievement, modern technology. That helps a lot. Another thing we've done is we created this IT executive council, and we have a specific piece around application development, and sort of cloud goes hand in hand with that. And so and so we do these big events. We haven't had one just recently because of all the, it's been a little busy, but but we were doing one every 6 months where we would bring industry in, other agencies, and we'd highlight things that dev groups were doing in the agency with each other, and really do that information sharing. And we are going to get back to doing that once we just, crisis was challenging. So basically by doing that, we were knitting together a community of practitioners across the department that didn't usually had kind of organizational silos. So we're trying to break down the silos. The other thing is that our organization is generally very compliance oriented. So we are also rewriting our regulations to basically require things like that you use agile processes first. And if you're going to do an application, you need to make sure that you need to use an enterprise platform unless there's a business reason you can't. And so by driving people down that path, it gives the people that want to do the right thing anyway the authority to do that. And it also signals that this is legitimate and the thing that needs to happen. The legitimacy is a big thing with change. You've got to have somebody important saying, no, really, guys, this is what you need to be doing. And then the other piece of that is really being able to build up, that layer of expertise that does the work. It's an ongoing challenge. So we're trying to do a lot of information sharing and enablement, and also through just our regular work engagements with customers and partners, furthering different ways of doing things and better ideas. And then as the business owners start seeing, well, God, man, they did this in a week. Why can't you? That's powerful. So delivery is probably the best. At the end of the day, you got to deliver. And if you don't deliver, it doesn't matter. You can try to change all day. So you still have to deliver where the rubber meets the road. So you got to bring all that stuff together. And the challenge is in not leaving people behind unnecessarily. There are sometimes, as you go through your stakeholder analysis, right? You have the superordinates that are the bosses that lead that cultural vision. You have the subordinates that work for you that execute all that. And then, you've got your customer base, which you've got to support. But then you also have this other sticky thing on the side, your complementers and blockers. And so as a leader, you've got to decide, who's a complementer, who can be my ally, who's going to block me, and then what do you do with that? And some blockers, you get around them, you go over them, you go through them. Sometimes you can coalesce them onto your side, and sometimes you have to know when to leave them behind and bypass them and keep going. And that's an art. I mean, that's a leadership thing, and you just have to figure that out. So really, I guess in a nutshell, I look at all of these um, implementations, projects, efforts, what have you, products as change efforts. And the underlying direction I'm trying to take this in is that I want to help people change the way they change. So instead of having these big, massive IT episodic implementations like the Navy ERP system, for instance, which took, I don't know, what was it, 12
Oh,
years
wow.
or whatever.
Wow, you're really going back.
Yeah. Why not just make small changes every day? And so that way, once you get to that baseline, you're not as far out of variance with where you need to be. And people are more accustomed to seeing small changes, and then it doesn't beat up the organization as bad. It's not as hard to manage. And so that's really what we're trying to do. So by using Agile and really establishing a baseline of capability, then it's just, well, now we're just managing a release every day. And that's become a standard thing. Like we do a release a day or a release, and we support that. We don't necessarily have to do that for everyone, but yeah, I mean, it's changing that kind of tempo of change and that risk tolerance around change, right? And it's hard for a lot of people because, frankly, IT folks like everything laid out, and they want to have the engineering schematic and know exactly what's going to happen next. And the real world just doesn't work that way. You have to have an idea of where you're going, and then incrementally get there, and be able to take advantages of opportunities and avoid risks as they pop up. So, it's just like when you're. I always use this analogy: when you're driving downtown, you don't ever turn left, right? You plan your trip so that you're always turning right at red lights. And if you don't, you're never going to beat traffic. So, especially in DC, that's kind of how we live. So, it's really important to think about it that way. When you're doing change, you want to lay your course out so you're always turning right. And that's part of the challenge is you have to have a strategy to your approach and really kind of war game yourself through it. And include people in those discussions and those ideas. And you don't want to leave the key folks behind. You can't do it alone. This whole thing, it really does take support at all layers. The challenge is aligning that support to have the right outcome at the right time. And that's what the leadership stuff has to do.
Yeah, and I think we talked a lot of it is the need for advocacy, right? That
Yeah.
it can't be we're headquarters and we're here to help.
Yeah.
It has to be that included conversation. But at some point you do need to move, right? You can't debate the same the same discussion over and over again and not actually achieve what you're trying to achieve. So
Right.
well, we're coming at the top of the hour here. Brian, thank you very much. Everybody that's on the phone, thank you for joining, and we'll see everybody in 2 weeks. And Brian, Terry Lee, I think Kirsten's going to want to snap a quick picture, and then we'll be on our way. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. All right, 3, 2, 1. Great. Thanks all.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Brian. Thanks, Terry Lee.
Thank you very much.